Howdy, small group. How's everybody doing? We've got another exciting session. We're going to be going through 2 Kings chapter 8. We're kicking it off with an icebreaker. Remember, our big idea is that it might seem like chaos on the center stage. Everything that's going on in our life around you, it might seem like chaos, but we need to understand that God, His hand is still at work behind the scenes. It's quite amazing as you look at the span of decades during the time of 1 and 2 Kings, how God said something would happen and then it would happen. That's something that we can trust in even now. But we're going to kick off with this icebreaker. It's basically this: share about a time when something seemed chaotic or confusing in your life, but looking back, you can now see how God was working behind the scenes. For me personally, I'll give you an example. I can think of three things. And these three times where life seemed chaotic, they were really doors that I felt like they just slammed in my face. When I was in high school, I wanted to be, Michael Jordan, wanted to be the greatest basketball player of all time. And I was pretty good. I was a pretty good shooter, but man, I could not dribble to save my life. I couldn't dribble my way through a press. So I was always considered a shooting guard. And I always really needed a good point guard alongside of me. And I could shoot, I could drive, but dribbling the ball through a full court press was rough for me. And we lost a couple games because of that. So I think all the other teams knew, like, this guy over here can't dribble through a press, so let's jump all over him. And so that's the first thing. I realized I wasn't going to be a professional basketball player. Things seemed chaotic, but God was speaking. Another one was I wanted to be the world's greatest trumpet player. But I had some limitations there. It turns out, I don't really have trumpet player lips, if that makes sense. That my trumpet player said, you really don't have trumpet player lips. Well, when I went to college initially, they said, you're going to be the best trumpet player in the history of our school. And that's what my professor said. Well, my professor left the next year, and I really just struggled. And God was shutting that door. I wasn't meant to be a professional trumpet player. And then later on, we're talking 15, 16, 17 years ago from today. I was in my early 30s. And I wanted to have a staff role at a certain church. And I wanted it so badly. But God shut the door on that. And I remember my initial interview process. They asked me to write like a little essay about what I felt God was doing in my life and what I wanted to do. And they asked me the question, if you could do anything in the world and money was no object, what would you do? Now, I wanted to say, well, I want this staff job because I thought it was going to be amazing. But what I wrote was that I would move to a community that needed to hear the gospel, and I would start a new church. That's literally what I said, and that was years before I ever even thought about starting a church. And so when I didn't get the job, even the guy that hired me was shocked, because it was like 2 levels above him that they decided they weren't going to even have that position on their staff. I remembered what I said in that interview, and it really got me thinking. And now here we are. God called us to plant a church, and God's doing some great things. So in 2 Kings chapter 8, we learned about the Shunammite woman who didn't stop believing. She moved over to the land of the Philistines. Her property got repossessed. And then after the famine, she moves back to town, and she has enough faith to go and meet the king and beg for her property back. And at the same time, Gehazi, Elisha's former servant, was there talking about the great works of God and the great works of Elisha. And God, in all of his providence, lined this whole thing up. It would have been easy for the government to not have repossessed the Shunammite woman's property, but the fact that they did caused her to have to go and put her neck out there and meet with the king. And because she met with the king, she got to see Gehazi, and God brought all of it together. And so her faith was built, Gehazi's faith was built, and even the king received a very godly testimony about what God could do. So don't stop believing. The second thing we learned about was how Hazael became the king of Syria. He was a wicked man. He ends up murdering Ben-Hadad. And it was God's will from the very beginning that Hazael become the king. And that sounds really strange. Why would God want a murderer to become the king? Well, God allowed it because he wanted Israel to be punished. In Deuteronomy 28, God said, if you turn your back on me, you will be cursed. And Israel had turned their back on God, and so now God was allowing a wicked king to take over in Syria so that Israel would be punished. And it really gives us an idea of what it looks like when we choose culture above Christ in our life today. It's predictable. Things might go wrong in our life. I mean, things go wrong in our life anyway, but when things go wrong in our life because we choose the culture above Christ, we know that's not God's fault. That's on us. And so Hazael becoming the king, God knew it would happen, but it was really Israel's own doing. And then the third thing that we learned about was Jehoshaphat and how he essentially sabotaged his entire legacy. He got cozy with Jehoram and with Israel, and they were all cousins, and he had hoped that maybe one day Israel would turn back to God, but in the midst of doing that, he really compromised. And one of the things I talked about in the message is if you want to sabotage your life and your legacy, well, marry an unbeliever and see how that works. I know sometimes it does work, and I know everybody thinks that they're going to be the exception, but after pastoring for a couple decades, most of the time, the weaker person ends up influencing the stronger person in the faith at least 9 times out of 10. It's just not a wise move. And so Jehoshaphat sabotages his legacy by allowing his son to intermarry into Ahab and Jezebel's family. That king's heart turns away from God, and not only Israel, but Judah's heart turns away from God as well. So as you dig into 2 Kings chapter 8, you see all of these things take place, and then we've got some practical application. The first thing is don't stop believing. Whatever God has going on in your life and whatever trials are going on in your life, that Shunammite woman, all of her property was repossessed, but she kept believing and God did amazing things. God will do amazing things in your life as well. Another thing we need to keep an eye out for is just a character check. Hazael looked like a good person on the outside, but he really was a murderous, terrible guy on the inside. How about you? I don't want to give myself too much credit to say that I'm perfect. I need accountability and I need encouragement in my life, and so do you. So hopefully you have some of that. And if you don't, maybe someone in your small group can help. Number 3, take a relational inventory. I know that Jehoshaphat allowed some ungodly relationships into his life. And as Paul says in 1 Corinthians, bad company corrupts good character. When you keep the wrong friends, they are going to influence you. And that's something that you and I need to keep our eyes out for. It's fine to have all kinds of different friends, but those core relationships, you want those core relationships to be people that really have your back. And as you even consider the people in your small group, these are people that are willing to pray for you, willing to encourage you. So as you go through your small group session, let's lean into that. And then lastly, here we are coming up on Easter season. I hope that you are thinking and praying about who you can invite to our 6 Easter services. God is going to use you to make a big difference this Easter. 3 things all of us can do. You can include and invite. You can invite them to church. You can invite them to youth. You can invite them to young adults. You can invite them to legacy adults. You can invite them to your small group. You can also bring church to them. Find ways to minister to people outside the walls of the church. And number 3, share your story. This is what my life was like before I met Christ. This is how I came to know Christ. And this is the difference that Christ has made in my life. And as you pray, as you go throughout your day, remember this. It might seem like chaos on center stage, but God's hand is always at work behind the scenes. Enjoy your session. Love you guys. We'll see you next week.